Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ground Up with Natalie. Today we have on Rebecca Serle, who is a New York Times bestselling author of One Italian Summer, In 5 Years, The Dinner List, and she also developed the hit TV show Famous in Love, where she wrote the YA series based off the same title. And she's a dear friend of mine, and we get into some really fun conversations today about relationships and love and her process when writing and her inspiration when she does write and her ground up story, where she came from, how she went from not being a New York Times bestselling author to being a New York Times bestselling author. So thank you again for coming back. And if you enjoy this episode, please make sure to rate the podcast at the end. Enjoy. I definitely want to get more into love. It's funny that we're opening with this too, because this episode comes out the day after Valentine's Day. So, I love that. Everyone, welcome. We have Rebecca Serle on the podcast today, and I'm so excited to get into so many things. But Rebecca, we start every episode with the Ground Up 3, which are 3 questions. She just stretched her back. Like,
I'm like, I'm ready. Right. I'm ready. Lay it on me.
It's just 3 questions just to start it off, get to know you. And I'm excited because I don't know any of these 3 questions. Okay, great. Which is number 1
Neither do I.
So. Where are you from?
Where am I from? I am from Hawaii by way of Philadelphia. So I was born in Philadelphia, but I grew up in Hawaii on Maui, which is where my parents still live.
I knew your parents lived in Maui. No idea that you grew up there.
Yeah. From first was Philadelphia, and then we moved to Massachusetts actually for a few years, and then Hawaii. So I went to 6th, 7th, 8th, and then high school on Maui.
Wow. Yeah. That's so fun.
People are always surprised to hear that. Because and then I moved to New York, which I think for me makes a lot more sense.
A lot more sense, especially with, I feel like a lot of the characters in your book live in New York.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I was in New York for 12 years, and that city was like a great love of my life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you think you'll go back? Because you live in LA right now with me.
Yes, I do. And I'm so happy here.
Yeah.
I never thought that I would move back to LA because I went to USC here, and then I moved to New York, and I just never thought I would come back. But I love it so much. Yeah. I can't imagine going back to New York now. But I don't know. I feel like one of the things that we learn as we get older is never say never.
Never say never. No. Never know what happens.
Never know what happens.
In 5 years. Which we'll talk about. Okay, what was your first job? Like paid job? Like mine was, I was a bagger at Albertsons.
Oh, I love that. My first paid job is that I worked for an unnamed designer who was really big in like the 80s and 90s and was making a big comeback. And I was the steamer girl. So all of the clothes that would come in from various photo shoots or, you know, anything that was lent out that would be returned, I just like, there was this like little room in the back of her studio that was on 5th Avenue, and I would just like steam clothes all day long.
All day long.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it felt glamorous to me because it was in New York.
I love it. You had purpose.
Yeah.
You're steaming the most important part of fashion.
Yeah. And then sometimes I would like get to like drop the clothes off, and that was really exciting.
Oh, did you like
fancy people
daydream in there? Like, did you have dreams of?
I always knew that I wanted to be a writer.
Okay. That's the next question. What was your first dream job?
Yeah. I always knew I wanted to be a writer, okay. But I will say I didn't really know that real people wrote books. I didn't really understand how that worked, and that seemed kind of crazy to me. And I don't even know if it was really a consideration. So when I was younger, I really wanted to work in magazines. So the fact that I was getting to work for this fashion designer was really exciting because it felt like a stepping stone to that career. I just knew I wanted to be in New York and I wanted to work in some way in publishing. Okay. But books felt so far-fetched to me. It just didn't seem possible. And then I started to understand the way publishing worked, and that really changed the game for me.
Yeah. So when you were younger, did your parents because you said you didn't know that real people wrote books. Were you like, I want to be a writer? And were they like letting you be creative, or were they kind of like, awesome, but like got to go to college first? Like, what was your childhood like?
They were very, very supportive. My mom is a fashion designer.
Oh, wow.
My dad had a chain of clothing stores actually when I was really young. They were always very creative people, and my dad was a huge reader. That's what got me into reading. My dad still reads a book a week. He reads everything. So they were always very supportive, but I think that they also didn't have any familiarity with, you know, I don't think any of the 3 of us knew like what's an agent, what's an editor,
right.
How do you go about that?
Yeah.
I just remember feeling like I loved organizing words on a page. And I felt like I was good at it. Like I felt like there was something in me. It felt very natural. I felt like I could do it. Yeah. And I don't remember a time before. It's always very curious to me when people say, oh, I discovered writing, you know, in my 50s.
Me too, about acting.
I think it's so interesting because to me, it's like, I'm Rebecca Serle and I'm a writer. It's who I am. Like I have, you know, brown hair or brown eyes or what. It's so fundamental to my whole person.
I feel like we're blessed to have known that though.
Yes.
Because some people, you know, get to college or high school senior year and they have to figure out what they want to do for the rest of their lives and they have no idea.
Yes.
And I knew very young too that I wanted to be an actor. And I can relate as well because my mom and dad were very supportive, but they also didn't know. She's like, well, I don't, what's an agent?
Yeah,
like,
what's an agent? How do you go about that? So did you find, actually, this is interesting, did you find that you ever sort of like veered off? Were there other dreams that you had? Because that seemed kind of nebulous and unclear, or you were like, I'm going to figure it out?
Dude, I was tunnel vision. I don't know what it was. People ask me like, where do you get your drive, ambition? I mean, I think one thing is I didn't have everything handed to me, right? I had to work for myself. At 16, you know, I got that job at Albertsons. Who wants to work as a bagger? I mean, I was happy. I was like, but I knew I wanted to get out.
Yes.
And so I felt like I want to support myself. I want to be successful. What do I want to do? I want to be an actor. And I'm someone who loves the process. So I was like, okay, where do I have to start? Okay, I need an agent and a manager. And not only was my mom didn't know how to do those things, but she wasn't a stage mom or interested in driving me up to LA because I only lived an hour and a half away. Yeah. Got my license at 16 and she's like, supportive though, lucky to have a supportive person that's like, you don't need to go to college if that's not what you want to do. And some people too, they don't, you know, Jay Shetty always says he's from like a very Indian culture, but he says that it's like doctor, engineer, or failure.
Yes, that's it.
And
that's
like,
it.
yeah. And my parents were not like that at all. So it gave me that freedom to be able to pursue.
Yeah. I love what you just said, by the way, that you love the process.
Yeah.
I feel like if there are any, you know, young people listening, that's pretty much the whole of it.
That's the whole of it, especially with, well, no, I always say, especially with entertainment and acting, but with anything. And that's what that's what this podcast is based off. It's called Ground Up, getting people's stories, how they went from not being a New York Times bestselling author to being a New York Times bestselling author. What is that in between? Because I know it wasn't easy.
Well, I will say on that note, my one piece of writing advice always for anyone is learn how to love the process, because I think that there's so much narrative. There's so much narrative. That's not correct grammar. There are a lot of narratives. Anyway,
don't ask me
about writing that's like, you know, cutting your veins open and bleeding on the page. It's tedious. It's like pulling teeth, whatever those metaphors are. And I really think the only way to do it is to cultivate a narrative around love for it. So I don't allow myself to have those thoughts or to speak about my work in that way.
I love it.
There will be times in which a book is challenging, but I don't choose to lean into that narrative. And I find that you can sort of like, you know, really lean into the forward motion if you're like, I love this.
Yeah.
I love this. And how blessed am I that I get to sit down every day and I get to do it.
Yes.
Well, not every day, we can get to that, but I think that part is really important. So I always had that. I always had this feeling of when I'm writing, when I'm sitting in front of my computer and I'm writing, there's no other place in the world I should be. And that was my story to myself all the time. It was always my story to myself is this is what I'm meant to do. And I think that the energy of that really carried me through. But we can talk specifics about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love that what you're saying as well. And there is part of you that has to have that passion and enjoy it.
Yes.
As well as.
What's the point otherwise?
Right. But I mean, organically, like that fires in you, as well as having to tell ourselves like, you know, like you're saying, almost like affirmations.
Yes.
Like I do, you know, I'm so lucky to be sitting here. I'm so lucky to get an audition.
Yes.
Right. Because so many people that I know complain about it.
Yes.
And complain, I can't believe we're doing self-tapes all the time. I can't believe we're not going in the room because of COVID. I hate tapes. And I'm like, ooh, you might want to reshape.
That's a recipe for disaster.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Yes.
Like it's already 1 in a million to book something. How are you supposed to do it when you're like shitting on the very thing that is the key to get you to be on a show?
Yes. Also, I think the other thing is, you know, we only want any of these things, to book a show, to publish a novel, because we think that they'll make us happy. Otherwise, why do we want them? Happiness ultimately is a choice. And I think that choosing it in all of the small moments allows for the big moments to have it. Because I will tell you, publishing a book, having a book on the New York Times, none of that is inherently joyful. You can make it joyful, but none of it is inherently joyful. And in fact, like, you could argue that the more comes into your life, the more stressful life can become a lot of times. And I will say that the process of publishing a book is far less enjoyable for me than the process of writing one. I'm not naturally a person who loves to like stand on a stage and speak about what I'm doing. I feel like I'm a writer because I can show you what I do the best through words.
I love that. It's almost like if someone's confused about their purpose, right, which I feel like is such a big thing these days, it's like, just think about what you're pursuing right now. Do you love the process?
Yes.
Like exactly what you said. If you don't get the Oscar, if you don't get on the New York Times bestsellers, if you don't publish a book, do you love, listen, those are the goals. And I totally get that and want to work toward it and think that we all deserve that. But are you miserable during the process, or do you love it?
Well, if you're miserable during the process, the odds that you're going to be miserable at the culmination of that process is pretty high.
Yeah.
They're you know, sort of, they're not the opposite. And I also feel like I've been very lucky in my career to have success relatively young. I published my first book when I was 25. And so it allowed me the freedom also to see that it's not that the happiness didn't come from the publication or, you know, it or like selling the film rights or whatever it may be. It really came from the writing. And so I know that now, and I get to do what I love, and that's great.
In the beginning stages, so I want to know, I'm so curious as to, like, I could tell someone for 10 hours how to get themselves in a position to book a show, right? Everything that it takes, kind of on the business side of things, the meetings, the pitch emails. What does it look like after you graduated from USC, right?
Yes.
After USC, or maybe while you were there, what does it look like to start the path to publishing a book?
So I was a creative writing and an English major at USC. And around my junior year, I had a professor named Marianne Wiggins, an incredible novelist. And she led this fiction workshop. There were like 5 of us. And she was, you know, very adamant about just like the writer's life. And she would always say to us, writing is 10% talent and 90% commitment and temperament, which I think has continuously proven to be true. But she started getting me thinking about graduate school. So I applied, and I knew I wanted to be in New York for a multitude of reasons. And so I got into the New School in Manhattan. And so I moved after graduation, and I started going to school at night. And then I also was introduced to this woman who owned a literary agency. It was like she had just launched it with a partner and 1 assistant, and that was me. So
you were the assistant?
Yes.
Okay.
And so I was working at this literary agency, and it was really just happenstance that I happened to be introduced to her, and there was a job available because I was in school at night, but I needed work. And then I was an assistant there, and then separately also I got an internship at Penguin, the publishing house. And the graduate degree was incredible. And I think that an MFA can be wonderful because it can give you the time to actually just focus on a project. But everything that helped me get published, I learned through on the ground job experience. It was through working in the industry that I really understood how it functioned. That I got to meet the woman who would become my first agent, all of those things. So I moved to New York. I started going to school, and I started on these 2 jobs. And then about 1.5 years later, I sold my first book.
Wow. So you're writing throughout all this at home in your New York apartment?
Forever.
Every day?
Yes. It's funny because I think people, when I say that I published my first book when I was 25, people say that's so young. But to me, I had been writing consistently daily for at least a decade.
That's the thing.
It didn't feel
10 years, 10,000 hours.
Right. It didn't feel soon or early or young.
Behind every overnight success is 10 years of hard work.
Right. So yeah, I had this, and it was incredible that all came together, and then I really got to understand the way publishing worked.
Yeah. But again, you say happenstance with meeting that woman, but also it's like all that hard work and energy that you've been putting into writing. And I'm sure you were putting yourself in positions and places where you would meet someone like that, you know? One thing that Guy Raz, who hosts a podcast called How I Built This, he always asks at the end of every episode, what do you think led to your success? Luck or hard work? Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, what do you think?
I think for me, I would be foolish to say it wasn't both, but I always really saw myself as like a little, those little wind up toys that you would, I don't even know what they're called, but you like stick them on the table and they sort of just like, that was me.
Okay.
I was just like, wind me up, and I was just sort of going to go. And if there was an edge to that table, I was going to pivot and I was going to move. But I feel like I was ultimately going to get there because, it's sort of what you said earlier. I was at the point then that I started to understand how publishing worked, I was really laser focused on making it happen. And so I think it was luck that it happened as early as it did, but I think that it always would have. It may have taken longer, but I think it always would have.
Yeah.
So. And I've also had, I've had so many different sort of eras and pivots to my career too. What I'm doing now doesn't look a whole lot like what I started off with, even though I'm still a novelist.
And meaning because now you're moving into, well, you've been in Hollywood. You wrote a book called Famous in Love, which then was created into a hit TV show on Freeform.
Yeah.
Yes.
Previously ABC Family. It was Freeform at the time we made the show.
Yes.
And that was really fun and a very, very different experience for me. And now I'm writing adult novels, which always sounds like risque when I say it, but I just mean that I started off writing novels for teens because I was 23, 24 when I was writing that book. And so I felt very close to the teen experience. And then as I grew, I wanted to talk about what it meant to be at the end of your 20s. I want to talk about what it meant to be entering your 30s, what it meant to be thinking and talking about partnership and motherhood and, all of these things. So I think that my books in a lot of ways really mirror my life stage.
Yeah.
And I hope that continues. And I think this is a little bit of a, not controversial, but debated topic amongst writers. Do you write for yourself or do you write for other people?
Oh, interesting.
And I think a lot of people would argue that you need to write for yourself, that, you shouldn't focus on who's ultimately going to read it, and that, you should write a book and a book in its purest form is a book that's to you.
It's interesting. I would think that the controversial part would be the opposite answer.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. I feel like I have the more controversial answer, which is that I always write in the hopes of dialogue. I feel like I always write to ask questions that I'm wrestling with or unclear about and to see what comes back. And a lot of times, when I publish a book, I will like sort of open up slots on my website and I'll do a lot of book clubs. And I was at one last week, and there's always, particularly with In 5 Years, my book before One Italian Summer, people have a lot of questions about the ending of that novel. And I always say, once a book is published, it belongs to you as much as it belongs to me. Like, I'm not the authority on it anymore.
Open for interpretation?
Absolutely. And it's like, once a story sort of leaves my fingers and it goes out into the world, the story belongs to whoever reads it.
Right.
But that, to me, like, that's the point. The point is not for me to own these stories forever. The point is for them to be shared and for them to feel like they have ownership in other people's brains.
I love that. I love that perspective. So let's talk about your books.
Okay.
So I'm going to admit I've read One Italian Summer, and I fell asleep last night to In 5 Years. So I'm on chapter like 8 or something like that, where she just discovered that fucking Aaron is the boyfriend of her best friend. Spoiler alert.
Oh, the audio.
Yeah, the audio.
Megan Hilty did such a good job.
Yeah,
I did the audio for the dinner list, and it's terrible.
Really?
It's the most poorly reviewed thing I've ever.
Stop.
Yeah, it was so bad. I mean, people really, apologies for, I guess, anyone listening to this, because apparently people really hate my voice, but people were saying, like, I think this is an okay book, but like her voice is just so. Anyway, I had a lot of fun recording it and I thought it was fun, but every time anyone mentions an audio in my book, I always caution against that.
Let me ask you something. When reading those or things in general, do you read your reviews of your books, of the audiobooks, of anything? I mean, I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
How does it make you feel unmotivated if they're bad reviews, or do you kind of look at, because like I posted a TikTok a couple weeks ago. I barely go on TikTok, and it went straight viral. It has 18 million views right now.
Holy shit.
And
what was it?
It was my mom opening.
Oh, I saw that. That was incredible.
Yeah. For the listeners,
That was really incredible.
It was my mom opening, or we were opening a dress, my mom's wedding dress. It's been in this box for 40 years and it's been in my grandmother's garage. My grandma just passed away. We're going through everything. And my mom's like, oh my God, my wedding dress, Natalie, you have to try it on. And so we go to open the box and it's in like 6 boxes. And the dress is not inside the box.
It was amazing.
It's not inside.
I mean, it was terrible. Like your mom was very upset.
It was very upset. And I was filming it literally just because I'm like, oh, what a moment. Like, you know, we're opening this box after it's been 40 years. I was not, you know, filming it for TikTok. Anyways, blah, blah, blah. It's getting a ton of like beautiful comments. Like, I'm so sorry. And I was never asking for any sympathy. I truly posted it thinking, I'm not a content creator on TikTok. I mean, now I'm like trying to become one because I'm like, oh, this is kind of fun. But before that, I really wasn't. And people were saying beautiful things. And then one person made a video that went like mini viral on her own page. And it was pretty much like, this video is really interesting. Like, you really don't think that it's fake that they did this? And I harped on that for a good like 6 hours.
Yeah. I know.
Thousands of comments. People DMing me like, hey, let's find this dress. I'm actually part of a vintage dress community. Can you send me the make and model?
That's so beautiful.
I know.
Wow.
And I immediately disregarded all of that truly. And I was like, I need to go to yoga right now, like get this off my mind because of this one mean comment. It's so interesting that we do that. So I'm curious, being a writer, it's so vulnerable putting your work out there. But maybe for me with acting is like, I get more confident as I do more work, right?
Yes.
And the bad comments are less relevant to me. Like, I don't care as much.
Yeah. I think that as I've gone on and I've published more books, I care less. Yeah. I care less as they go. There's certain, of course, like, you know, when you're waiting for those initial reviews, you know, and I'm talking about like, should you be so lucky to get like a review in the New York Times, which I've actually never gotten, or, you know, or Kirkus or Publishers Weekly or things like that. I'm always on eggshells because I respect my publishing community and I respect that their taste level and point of view. And so, you know, I would like to be well reviewed. But when it comes to reviews like Goodreads or Instagram or things like that, it doesn't really bother me so much. I will say I've gotten, I think, a lot more, I don't want to say cautious, but mindful of what I will put on social media. Like, I don't share my relationship. I
noticed that.
Yeah, I feel like the things, I'm not interested in other people's opinions about my personal life. And so it seems pointless to share it because the whole, I think, deal with social media is that when you post something, whether you like it or not, you're saying like, okay, I'm open to feedback.
Totally.
That's what you're going to get.
Yeah.
And I don't feel open to feedback in that. But of course my work, you know, I kind of have to be open to feedback in my work.
Yeah.
Because of what I just said, because I really do consider my books to be a dialogue. It's not one-sided.
Right. So it would be counterproductive if you were like, but don't say anything bad about it.
Yeah. I mean, everybody has, I guess,
everyone
right to an opinion but it doesn't affect me the way that it used to, for sure.
So at one point it sort of did. I'm sure in the beginning you're getting your bearings.
But also, I mean, I published my first book in 2012, 2011.
And there was like no social media.
It was a very different landscape. It was very, very, very different. Yeah. It was just nice. A totally different thing. So, and now I write, you know, my readers are not, I mean, I think it's a little bit of a different market in that way. And I think the thing that's really important to keep in mind is that what you're seeing on social media is such a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the people who you're actually impacting with your work. It's so small. And I think that's like, I think that's important to keep in mind because sometimes it can feel like those comments are the whole world and they're just not.
They're not. And actually someone that's positively impacted, a lot of times they don't share it with you because maybe they're not on social media because they have a life and they're not, you know, and so I think that's a great way to look at it too. Someone will tell me in person about something, you know, something that magic helped them and I had no idea, you know, and I'm like, wow, thank you so much. Like, that's so helpful. But people don't often tell me that on like comments or whatever. So I protect myself by not going on social media too much and scrolling.
Yes.
You know, because I'll get unproductive.
Oh yeah. It's really, I mean, it's so toxic.
It's so toxic.
I will say I wish I could remember who said this to me, because I'm not trying to take credit for it. I didn't come up with this, but a friend of mine, New Year's resolution was, I'm going to treat reading the way I do my phone.
Oh my God.
And I've been trying to adopt that, which means you have to carry a larger bag because you always have to have a book with you.
Oh.
I never had it before, which I should have, but I have Audible now, which helps sometimes. But just even that brain switch to say, okay, I'm waiting in line, at the coffee shop,
right.
or I'm waiting for a friend in my car who isn't at the restaurant yet, or whatever it is. Instead of like picking up my phone and scrolling through my emails or texts or Instagram or whatever it is, I'm going to pick up a book and I'm going to read 3 pages. But that's actually how you change. I mean, I know that you are really into habit setting, and that is how you change habits. That's how you do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Switching a habit with something else and stacking it on another habit.
Yes.
One thing that I do every single morning is, I read first. I mean, I do magic and then I read, because too much stuff happens throughout the day where my focus isn't gonna, revert back to really being able to have that quiet time and reading. It's detrimental to wake up and go on your phone and scroll on TikTok.
Yes.
It's like having 250 people in your bedroom in the morning, like knocking and shouting at you. And, what if there was like a tragedy that happened? Like, you're going to hear about it in 30 minutes.
Yes.
Can I just have a few minutes to like control a small part of my day that will essentially set you up for a more grounded and peaceful day? But I am so going to do that. The reading in line or whatever.
Use a book as if it were your phone.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, we have to get to the books.
Okay.
So, I read One Italian Summer when I was living in New York, and I was by myself living there. Every night I was so excited to get home because I read it at night and like fall back into this story. And so I want to know, where did you get the inspiration to write One Italian Summer? And also if you can give us a tiny synopsis of what the book is about for people listening.
Yes, that's so nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. One Italian Summer is the story of Katie Silver. She is a young woman who has just lost her mother. And her mother was, her best friend and her first phone call and all those things that moms can be if we're very, very lucky. And the two of them had this trip planned to go to Positano, which is a place that Katie's mom, Carol, loved when she was a young woman. She was there when she was Katie's age, and they always just like wanted to go back together. Carol unfortunately passes away before they can take the trip, and Katie decides to kind of embark on this adventure alone and go on this trip by herself without her mom. And then in a magical twist, ends up meeting her mom when her mom is also 30, and they spend the summer together as two young women. I took a trip with my mom to Italy in the summer of 2019, and my mom, similar to Carol, had spent a summer in Rome. She was 19, so she was younger than Carol, and she fell in love with this man named Remo and always talked about the summer in Italy. And we actually found Remo on Facebook. My parents are very happily still married together, and I always leave that part of the story for too long. So my mom's like, you have to tell people
right away.
Anyway, we ended up finding Remo on Facebook, and they met at the Trevi Fountain, which is the place that they had met like 50 years before. And he brought her this charm on it that said LOVE, that she had given him that summer, that he had kept all of these decades.
No.
And in the hotel before, my mom is like a very like outgoing Jewish mother. Like, she's not a wallflower. And I remember she was like, does this skirt look good? Like, do you like this top? Like, I was seeing her as this young, nervous girl getting ready to go see this boy that she liked. And I felt like, wow, how interesting. Like, what if I felt like I was having an experience that people don't really get to have with their mothers. And I thought, what if I could spend time with that young woman who first fell in love with Remo, and what might that look like? So that's kind of how One Italian Summer came to be.
So did that instance incident.
Incident.
But it's not like a bad, I don't know. Did that happen before you decided to write? So that literally inspired it? Like you guys randomly went and you're like, let's meet your.
Yes.
Whoa.
And then I thought, okay. And the way my ideas usually work is I was like, there's no way that I won't use this in some way. Right. This is too good. This is too, and then I went on. So my mom and I, had this time in Rome, and then she left and I went on and met some girlfriends in Positano. And as I was there, I wasn't really thinking about a book, but on my last day there, I walked around town and I filmed all of the streets, like the way the streets interact and the signs, which is always sort of a sign that I think I will probably want to return to this place. Mm-hmm. So that was summer 2019. And then I moved to Los Angeles, and then I had a book in 5 years that was coming out. And in 5 years was really my book that just changed the game in my life. It was the first book I had that was a New York Times bestseller. It was the first book I had that really sold very widely. And I thought, like, we were all just working so hard to make that book a success. Mm-hmm. And I was going on a 14-city book tour, and it was like the Good Morning America book club pick and all of these things.
Wow.
So I flew to New York to like launch the book. And this is then now March 10th of 2020.
Oh my gosh, that's 3 days before.
Yeah.
Because March 13th was the lockdown.
Right. So COVID is like, it's definitely on people's minds. And pub day, I remember just like sort of breaking down to my editor and saying, I don't know. I mean, again, I was on a 14-city book tour and it was full steam ahead. Like nobody was stopping. So in that morning, we're all like, it was the elbow bump stage. Remember how people weren't hugging? They were just elbow bumping. And then I was going, so we do our New York event, and then I'm leaving and I'm driving to Boston. And two things happened that night. The first was that The Atlantic published that piece that was the case for canceling everything, where they basically wrote this whole article saying the world is about to change, get ready. And the second was that Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson got COVID. And that was really the thing that totally... So anyway, long story short, I get to Boston. Obviously, the tour gets canceled, and I flew home, and the rest is history. So I had this weird space where I was meant to be promoting in 5 years, and I was terrified that nothing was going to come of it now because the news was overtaken by what was going on. And there was really, there was Zoom, but nobody was familiar with it. There was really not a ton of online promotion. People weren't doing like Instagram lives in the same way. And so
you probably thought, damn, this timing is impeccable with what you thought was going to happen. And in turn, of course, it turned into your best-selling book.
Yes. So what ended up happening was that this book in 5 years was so we had banked this segment with Good Morning America like 2 weeks beforehand. And it aired the Monday after stay-at-home orders came down. And I think, these are totally made-up numbers, but let's say the broadcast had something like 3 million. Usually has something like 3 million. It had like 12 because everybody was home. And the book just exploded. And it was so a case for you can't ever, like what we're saying, never say never. I thought the book was just dead in the water. I thought it was going to be over. And then it just ended up exploding. And it was sort of one of the books that I feel like people were, that was able to connect people when they couldn't be together. And that was beautiful. But anyway, back to One Italian Summer. So I had all this time because I was meant to be promoting in 5 years, but I wasn't. And I wrote One Italian Summer from basically like March to June of 2020. And I wanted to be, like so many of us, anywhere besides the four walls of my house. And I kept dreaming about Italy. And I felt like, okay, I'm just going to write my way there. And the book really did feel like a vacation to write in so many ways, particularly during that time. And so it makes me happy when people feel like it's a little bit of a vacation, like a little bit of an oasis to read in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. What a story. And I'm sure, so does it usually take you about 4 months to write a book?
Yeah, about 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
I do first drafts pretty quickly, but the whole publishing process is like about 2 years.
Wow. So 4 months is quick.
4 months is really quick, really quick. I draft my first drafts really fast because I for me it works to stay in step with a story. I think if I take too much time out of it, it's harder for me to get back in. And so when I'm actively writing, I do 2,000 words a day, and that means actually 2,000 words, like not 2003. So you end at 2,000 because the next day it's much easier to get back into a story in the middle of a sentence.
Is this something that you created, made up?
No, I mean, a lot of writers talk about this.
It's like a 2000 rule?
Not necessarily. I mean, people have different word counts. 2000 is what works for me. But starting in, ending your day's writing in the middle of a idea as opposed to completing. I think that we intuitively want to keep writing until the inspiration fades.
Right.
But if we do that, it becomes really challenging to get into our work the next day.
Interesting. So it's like you sleep on it and then you're excited to wake up and keep going?
Yeah. And also you're still in the middle of a thought. So the next day when you come to your page, you know what that thought is. You've already had it.
Yeah.
And then by the time you finish that thought that was left over from yesterday, you're already in the work.
Re-inspired to keep going.
Like you're already in it. Whereas opposed to like if you complete a scene or a chapter or whatever it may be the day before and you come back and now it's like the blank cursor staring at you and you're like, okay, well, what now?
Yeah.
I find it's just a lot easier for my momentum if I leave off mid-sentence.
Got it. Oh my gosh. What a fun fact to know.
That's my
part of your process. And then,
yeah.
I mean, during this time writing One Italian Summer was at your house?
Yes, at my house. Okay. Completely at my house.
Completely at your house by yourself.
Completely at my house alone by myself, which is like my little playlist and my coffee, just being like, okay.
All day for, 4 months, but years. I mean, with the pandemic.
Yeah, it was forever. But yeah, I think, place has become really important for my books. The dinner list in 5 years are very New York books because at the time I wrote them, I was living there and I was just in love with that city. And then What Italian Summer is obviously like very, very much Italy.
Yeah.
And this new book that I'm working on is going to be about Los Angeles.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's so cool. So you write very close to one of my questions was going to be, do you write picturing yourself? Because in 5 years, she's a young Jewish girl living in New York.
Yes.
I remember reading One Italian Summer, and I've never been to Italy, so I had no idea these places you were talking about. And I bet you did this for a lot of people when I went to Italy a year later. I mean, I was thinking about your book. I was like, because I went to Positano, and I was like thinking about the places because I knew they're all real.
Yeah.
The way it's written, it's like,
they're all real. All the places, and I mean, most of the places I would say in all of my books are real. And it's really fun. We have book club guides for all 3 books.
Okay.
And they have like, some of them have like walking tours of New York City or like a sample travel itinerary for a Positano trip.
See, that I would so click on that.
Yeah, it's fun. And when I went back there this past summer 22, and I stayed at the Hotel Poseidon, which is where the book takes place. And it was just so great because there were so many people there reading the book and so many like mothers and daughters who had taken the trip because of the novel. And
no way.
It was
Rebecca,
really
that's
special.
so cool.
It was really, really, really special.
Wow.
And I don't say that in any type of like, I mean, I hope that doesn't come off like,
no.
Look at this thing. I really mean that those are the kind of elements of my success that are so deeply gratifying. And I think I've learned as I've moved along in this career to like take those moments into my soul and into my heart and like really pleasurably enjoy them. And so the experience of getting to meet readers and hear from women who'd lost their moms and who took this trip or who brought their adult daughters or it was just so deeply meaningful to me. And that was very, very special.
I love that. You deserve to feel that because it's just beautiful writing. And I felt the same way. Like I felt like when I was reading it, I had thoughts of, I wonder what my mom was like. And I just recently realized this in my adult years that my mom is a person.
Yes. That's crazy when that happens.
Yeah.
Huh? Like our parents didn't know any more than we did.
No.
I mean, if anything, they knew
less. I knew more than you, Mom.
For sure.
It's not true. And reading that book, I was like, wow, imagine spending, because in the book, she ends up, which by the way, when I read that sentence, I was shocked that she saw her mom at the hotel, her mother who is since passed away.
Yes.
She sees on this trip. And I was like, wait, what? Because I had no idea that you wrote, magical realism. Like I didn't. So it was like, it's like normal.
And then there's this one thing that is sort of, and I remember thinking, so, in the book, she meets her mom, Carol, when her mom is 30. And I remember that scene being a little bit of a like debate, not a debate in my brain, but I remember thinking like, okay, well maybe like they meet and she's like, this woman looks familiar. And I said, no, if it's your mom, like, her immediately.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, if I encountered my mother at 30, there would be no question in my mind as to who that was.
Right.
Like I know every cell in her body. I would know her immediately. I would be like, that's my mother. If I met her at 12, if I met, like, I would just know.
Right.
And I think that is, that kind of intense connection, that kind of soul connection of a mother and daughter is really the thorough thread of this novel.
It would be an interesting process to have with yourself. I feel like everyone should do this, where they go and they're like, because you find a lot of love, like more understanding for your mom when you realize that they had a love and that she was, I mean, I forget a little bit, but wasn't she out, like she was kind of like partying with this guy and stuff like that. And you're just like, holy shit. Like, cause for my mom, I'm so used to be so hard on her.
Oh yeah.
You know,
especially as girls. I mean, I will say that now, I mean, like, I think that girls are just so hard on their mothers. My mom and I were recently talking about children. I was like, boys are so, talking about babies, like having kids. And I was like, boys are so hard. My mom was like, they're harder for the first 6 years. And then girls are harder forever.
oh,
Because my friends and I, like, we're all in our 30s and we're out here still being like, oh, mom, like, why don't you? Whereas boys, I feel like once they're 16 are like, my mom's great. Like, she's my mom. What's the problem?
It's so true.
I think like the mothers of daughters are like deeply checked human beings.
Yes.
Like they are in the work and can never get out of the work. Whereas I think mothers of sons are sort of like, I'm great. What's the issue?
Yeah. Jesse used to say when he would see me around my mom that I would immediately revert back to like, mom.
Yes.
Like, and he's like, whoa, he's never seen that from me. From our, like, you know, because it took a long time for him to meet. We're talking about my ex-boyfriend, who is mine and Rebecca's mutual friend.
Yeah.
We were in a pandemic together when we met, so we never were around other people or anything.
Right, that's so true.
And so then he sees me in this environment with like my mom, and I immediately revert back to this, like, you know, 15-year-old self that's in there, you know, just a little bit.
It's so auto. My mom and I got in a fight. My parents are in town right now, and my mom and I got in an argument yesterday because she was talking to her friend, and her friend said something about like me not calling her back, and I like was like, I never, like, she never reached out. Like I immediately had this teenage response of like, how dare you tell me what to do, or how, you know.
Yeah. And we would never talk to like anyone else.
And of course, like, I mean, like, you know, like my boyfriend thinks it's crazy because he has one brother, and he's like, we've just like, he's had such a sort of calm dynamic with his mom since he was like 12.
That's so funny.
And
to me.
we're like, you know, we're still, again, like I really do use in the work, because that's what I think it is. If you have that in your life, and I'm one of those people who sort of believes that we get what we have signed up for, and in that capacity. And I think that, you know, we're just like, we're sort of just meant to keep mirroring and keep work. Like my mom is a huge teacher to me, but I also think I am a huge teacher to my mom, and it's challenging sometimes.
Yeah, I'm with three girls, and so my mom doesn't know anything else. I feel bad. I wish she had some boy energy, but she doesn't. Because the boys are just so like, they're just so like, you're the best. Yeah,
you're wonderful.
Yeah, that's so true. 1 through 6 is when they're harder. Oh
yeah, because they're so rambunctious. They have so much energy, and but then, you know, then it's a whole different ball.
Different ball game with the teenage years, and, you know, meeting boys and dating and all of that stuff.
Yes.
Okay, so I do have a question, because as an actor, sometimes, you know, we can get so engulfed in a project and then kind of be in that world for a little bit. You write magic realism. Do you feel like it's hard to pull yourself out of something like Katie's world in One Italian Summer? Like, are you thinking about it a lot? Like, I can literally watch a show or read a book. When I read One Italian Summer, I was thinking about her. Like when I woke up. For those 4 months that you're writing, are you kind of engulfed? And then after that, are you engulfed, or do you pull yourself out?
Yes, when I'm actively writing, it's really the only thing on my mind.
Okay.
I feel like I just sort of like fall into a hole, and that hole is just the world of the book, and that's where I am. But it's an extremely pleasurable experience to be that immersed in your work. It's really great. It's wonderful. I love that feeling.
I mean, that's probably why you do it.
Yeah,
it's like
it's the best
flow state.
It's such a flow state, but it's part of the reason I tend to write quickly, because, you know, life, as we all know, life is complicated and busy, and now it's, you know, unfortunately, writing is actually such a small part of my job, because there's, I'm getting ready to promote the paperback of One Italian Summer. I'm doing final edits on a new novel. I'm starting to think about the idea for another. I have film adaptations of these books going on that so there's all this sort of business happening. And I can't stay in that flow state all year.
Right.
I have to like kind of pick myself up and look around and say like, okay, how does this business need to be run? So when I get the chance to just drop in and be there, it feels like it's like illicit almost. Like I always feel like I'm like having an affair with this book. Yeah. That's how sort of exciting it feels to me. And yes, it is all I think about. And then after in edits, less so. I mean, I'm working on an edit now, and it's just kind of like a thing that I'm doing.
Totally.
It like the characters are just so unbelievably alive when you're drafting it. And then it becomes, I think after you've drafted it, it becomes a story. And then you're just sort of figuring out the technicality of that story.
Technicalities, yeah, I bet it becomes the business side. So you get to be engulfed in it and relish it, hopefully, during those months, and then kind of not let it go. But it's like, all right, let's get this thing out there. And then it becomes like a different shift in the mindset.
Thing. Yes, it's a totally different thing.
So we started off this conversation talking about some love. And so I think we should finish it off with some love. So my question to you is, there's a lot of love stories in your books, and are you a hopeless romantic? And do you believe that, love stories written in books and movies kind of have a skewed what real love in real life is? Because when you write, like even in not the dinner list, in 5 years, when you're describing like the sex and stuff and everything, like I'm even just like, oh, and then you think about I feel like someone can easily think about their own life and it's like, oh, it's not like that. Like, what are your views on that?
Well, I think that, I get asked a lot if there'll be sequels to the dinner list and in 5 years. And the truth is no, because it's not really interesting what happens after, which I think is and it doesn't mean, I think that people mistake that and think that it means that it's not a dramatic story. It means it's not worthwhile. Again, I think actually all of the good stuff happens in the tiny moments when it comes to relationship and love. And I personally get so much pleasure out of routine and out of building a life with somebody. I think that it is like such a worthwhile thing to do should you choose to do it. I think what I've found about love and fairly older and quite recently, right, is that I think that falling in love is a bad way, like it's a bad phraseology. I think that
what my therapist says.
Yes, what I've found is that love has felt much more like a purposeful stepping towards, not a fall. And nothing about, I think, for me, the right relationship for me. And again, like to our prior point of love is what you need. I really think that it can look like so many different things based off what your soul is needing and what your journey is and what you're calling in. So this is just for me, but that intentionality for me has felt so deeply stabilizing. And I now find that stabilization to be very romantic.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Really and like deeply, fulfillingly romantic.
What a great answer of like combining. So you're like, yes, right? Because in real life, we need stability.
Yes.
So no, it's not the movies 24/7, but that is deeply romantic for you.
It's deeply romantic for me. It really is. To have that foundation and to feel like you're continuously choosing to come home to something, to me feels very, very romantic.
And the trust that goes into that and the safety.
Yes.
Like those aren't bad things. Sometimes we can think like, oh, I'm so comfortable. I'm so like, it's too safe. There's no risk. It's like, okay, well, there comes a point where you need it.
Yeah. And it can't, and listen, sometimes I think the wrong relationship for you can feel those things. And I think that I just think we know ourselves so much better than we give ourselves credit for. And I think a lot of times if you're asking those questions, you already know what the answer is. I really genuinely believe that. I think that when we're conceptualizing love, which in 5 years in the dinner list very much were a conceptualization, it looks different than the day to day. And I think that I've never really written a book about searching for romantic love or necessarily having romantic love. I think that all of my novels are love stories, but they're not always romantic love stories. I mean, In 5 Years is a love story between two friends, and One Italian Summer is a mother-daughter love story. And so I'm really interested now in my work to get into both what it means to search and also to have it. And the way that we come in contact with these old narratives we have and the way we choose to update them for ourselves. That's like really compelling and meaty and interesting to me now. So
that's beautiful. I'm so glad that I asked that because it helps me. I did it selfishly for myself, especially when I mean, I feel like you're right. Our intuition, we give no credit to, and it knows so much about so many different things and the feeling in our body rather than what's going on in our mind, in our head. We get so heady and it's like, what's going on here? But we don't take the time and space to like feel that enough.
Exactly. And we do know. And the other thing I will say is that I think so many things about love are the way that I really thought that they would be. And I'm glad that I sort of had a North Star about what I wanted and what those felt like. But I also think a lot of them are really like very much the inverse. And I think for a long time, I felt like partnership meant personal sacrifice. And that is true. But what I didn't understand is that the personal sacrifice is actually like the blessing in it. It is such a privilege to be able to show up for someone else and to be able to like really see them. And just to bring it back to what we were talking about initially, to like want to grow for them and with them. And it's like I saw it, but I didn't really understand what it would mean. Wow. And so I think I was narrating that sacrifice as being something negative. I think we see sacrifice and we think like maybe a lack of or some kind of taking away. And what I found is that sacrifice for me has been the whole point.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I wish we can talk about this forever.
I know, let's keep talking.
Yeah. Right. That's the definition of love right there and I wonder if it's a timing thing, right?
I think it's both. I think it's age, timing. I think it's all of it. And I think people come to these things at the time in which they're meant to come.
Right. And that person will show up at that time that they thought about. It's like when you read something in a book and like it doesn't process.
Yes.
And then you read it at a different point in your life and it's like, whoa, that touched me so much.
Yes.
So, well, Rebecca, thank you so much for coming and chatting with us here on Ground Up. I loved hearing your story. Where can everyone find your books and get in touch with you?
Thank you for having me. I mean, I love you so much, but this was just really, really fun to do this. You're such an excellent interviewer. RebeccaSerle.com is a great place to find me. I am going back on tour on March 7th for the paperback of One Italian Summer. So I will, both on Instagram and also on my website, those dates will be posted. And then, like I said, we have book club kits and all kinds of fun extra material that go along with my novels.
So much fun. Yeah, guys, I hadn't read a fiction book in a really long time. I'm a huge self-help junkie. And I read One Italian Summer and I fell in love. I told all my friends about it. I'm like, you have to. And it was like a 4-day for me. And I'm not that fast of a reader. So like 4 days for me was really fast. And I read it so quickly and I loved it. And now I'm reading In 5 Years, which is also being developed into a movie, which is really exciting. So yeah, thank you. Until next time.
Until next time.